Obvious to anybody with eyes is that Donald continues to demonstrate the fact that he is psychologically, emotionally, cognitively, and physically in decline. This has been in evidence over the last couple of days, first with his off the charts presser at the White House, and then with his unfortunate, deeply unhinged remarks on the world stage in Davos, Switzerland. The remarks weren't just combative and full of grievances and the kind of propaganda he's been putting out there since he lost the election in 2020. But they showed real signs that he is not always oriented to time and place. Now, I cannot always understand exactly why Donald becomes obsessed with the things he's obsessed with. I don't know why he hates wind energy so much, for example. I don't really understand why he keeps making the demonstrably false claims that windmills kill birds and fish and whales for some reason. I don't know why he's so obsessed with water pressure. Every once in a while, though, Donald does tell on himself. I want to read part of the transcript from yesterday's remarks, which again were in front of the world's leaders. We had in my area in Queens, I grew up in Queens, at a place called Creedmoor. Did anybody know that? It was big. I said, Mom, why are those bars on the building? I used to play Little League baseball there at this place called Cunningham Park. I was quite the baseball player. You wouldn't believe it. But I said to my mother, Mom, she would always be there for me. She said, son, you could be a professional baseball player. I said, thanks, Mom. I said, why are those bars on the window? Big building, powerful building. It loomed over the park, actually. Now, I think that's a pretty unfriendly sight. I'll never forget it. I don't know if it's still there because if they got rid of most of them, but I'd say, why does the building have those bars? It wasn't normal. You're used to looking at like a window. But this one, you look at all these steel, vicious steel, tiny windows, bars all over the place. Nobody was getting out. It's called a mental institution. That was an insane asylum. Yes, indeed. That is a direct quote from remarks Donald Trump, the president of the United States of America, made to world leaders at Davos. I'm pretty sure that's not the kind of thing they were there to hear. Although perhaps that was less unwelcome than hearing Donald say that he's going to take over Greenland. But again, I sometimes think Donald is telling on himself. I think that he has anxieties with which he's riddled. He has fears that are never assuaged. He talks often about insane asylums. In fact, one of the reasons for justifying the egregious assaults on American citizens by ICE and Customs and Border Patrol is that President Biden let in all sorts of people, including those who had been in insane asylums. He also claims a close personal relationship with the serial killer, whose name I forget, Hannibal Lecter. Anyway, this has me thinking about the fact that Alzheimer runs in my family. Now, I'm hoping it skips my generation. But while on the one hand, I sometimes do see similarities between Donald and my grandfather, who developed Alzheimer's sometime in his late 70s or early 80s. But there are many, many differences. What I see that they have in common is that they do not always seem oriented to time and place. They don't always know who they are or who they're with. Donald often gets a deer in the headlights look that I used to see on my grandfather on occasion, particularly when he was out in public among large crowds, which is why eventually he stopped going out. That is pretty much where the similarities end, though. By the time he was in his mid-80s, my grandfather started forgetting everybody he knew. Sometimes people he'd known for decades, including Well, I was going to say his own grandchildren, but that's hardly a surprise. But including his own children. In fact, I was with my Aunt Marianne the first time my grandfather failed to recognize her. Now, despite the fact that she was hardly a decent human being, it was painful to watch when she realized that her father no longer knew who she was. The other thing that happened with my grandfather is that, despite the fact that his entire life he had been a hard-ass sociopath, cutthroat businessman, and a very cold, unaffectionate father and grandfather, he actually became sweet. In fact, my grandfather was never kinder to me than when he had completely forgotten who I was. He used to refer to me as the nice lady. We are not seeing any such softening with Donald. In fact, I would argue that he is getting more cruel, more belligerent. He is more prone to lash out. His impulse control is eroding at an alarming rate. And I think what we have to worry about is that the more threatened he feels, the more he feels that the walls are closing in on him, or the more that he feels that he is no longer in control of himself or the narrative, the more dangerous he's going to become. So remember, we can never, ever trust anything Donald Trump has to say. He will always be looking for another way to get somebody to capitulate to him, whether it's through threats or through actual use of force. He told the other members of NATO and business leaders and heads of state at Davos that he was not, after all, going to use force against Greenland. We cannot ever take him at his word, because he is not making decisions based on the facts on the ground. He is making decisions based on his very deep and increasingly terrifying insecurities. That is what we're up against. Let's dive in. Good evening and welcome to this episode of Mary Trump Live. It is wonderful to have you with me. I'm sorry I've been absent this week, but I've had a lot going on. It is great to be back with you tonight, though. So let's just get started. In Minnesota, an unprecedented number of detained immigrants are challenging their wrongful arrest by ICE, and many of them are winning. According to the Minnesota Star Tribune, since Operation Metro Surge began on December 1st, 344 immigrants have filed detention challenges in the state, most of them this month, as thousands of federal agents arrived. By comparison, 375 such cases were filed statewide between 2016 and 2024. That is a trend, as they say. So on the one hand, that is demonstrative of the fact that ICE is using increasingly violent extralegal tactics, and thankfully, the people they're attacking are fighting back. But this is not sustainable. That number is going to increase unless and until state officials realize that peaceful protesters need to be protected from an American agency. It is time to get local law enforcement and even the National Guard, if necessary, out in the streets defending American citizens and others protesting against ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, basically against the Trump regime. About half of the cases reviewed by the Tribune led to court-ordered release or bond hearings for detainees, and they found zero evidence of a warrant in most of these cases. The whole country was rocked by a story that broke this week about ICE terrorizing a preschooler. Here's NBC's Today with the story.
Who's sounding alarms, they say, about 4 of their students taken into ICE custody including a 5-year-old boy who they say was detained with his father in the family's driveway. The district alleges that another adult in the home begged agents to leave the child with them, but that the agents refused. NBC News reached out to DHS about this overnight for comment. They didn't respond to us, but the agency did tell the Washington Post that their policy is to ask parents if they want to be removed with their children or be placed with a person designated by the parent. And all of this comes as the administration now appears to be, or is, expanding their immigration operations to the state of Maine, calling that one Operation Catch of the Day, and stressing there, like they have done here in Minneapolis, that they're apprehending, in their words, the worst of the worst criminals.
Well, ICE continues to demonstrate that it is comprised of the worst criminals, headed by the same. ICE is completely out of control. In addition to this, I mean, don't get me wrong, that 5-year-old looked really terrifying. But in addition to this kind of thing, they also dragged an American citizen who's a grandfather out of his house without a warrant in the ice cold of Minnesota in his boxer shorts. They said they were going after 2 sex predators, and oh well, they're bad, I guess. The family was just relieved that they returned the man to his home. Despite all of this, during his visit to Minneapolis, yeah, that's just what Minneapolis needs, a visit by J.D. Vance, the vice president defended ICE. Watch this.
President Trump this week said that ICE has made some mistakes. I'm curious what steps the administration is taking to rectify those, and do you think your presence in Minneapolis today will calm the tensions there?
Well, certainly one of my goals is to calm the tensions, to talk to people, to try to understand what we can do better. You know, when the president says that that mistakes have been made, you know, my thought on that is that, well, of course there have been mistakes made, because you're always going to have mistakes made in law enforcement.
Are you really? Is that you're always going to have mistakes made in law enforcement, therefore give them complete and total immunity for shooting people in the face? I mean, I'm pretty sure that that's how Vance would end that sentence. He, of course, has no interest at all in lowering the temperature. His goal, just like Donald's goal and Kristi Noem and Tom Homan and Greg Bovino, is to ramp tensions up to the point where real violence, riots will break out so Donald can come in and declare martial law or justify invoking the Insurrection Act. The Davos debacle, or I should say the fallout from the Davos debacle, continues. In a new twist, Donald announced that he's walking back his plan to take over Greenland, which included a threat of military force. He's also withdrawn his initiative to enact tariffs on any European nations that stood in his way. He announced this reversal in a post on his failing social media platform. And the post read in part, quote, "Based upon a very productive meeting that I've had with the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, we have formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. The solution, if consummated, will be a great one for the United States of America and all NATO nations. Based upon this understanding, I will not be imposing the tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect on February 1st. I'm not reading that last sentence because it makes my head explode. Unquote. Sorry, that wasn't part of the quote. My head exploding. My take on this is that Donald got played. He was asked later by reporters as he was gingerly walking down the stairs, what's in this deal? And he just kept saying it's great for America, but could provide absolutely no specifics whatsoever. None. It's great for America, he kept saying. And it is kind of fascinating to know that Donald is approaching the situation with Greenland just like he's been approaching healthcare in America. We have a concept of a framework of a plan. The New York Times reported on the behind-the-scenes dealings that brought about this update. NATO officials have been discussing possible compromises with Donald for days. This included a deal in which the U.S. could gain limited sovereignty over small areas of Greenland for military bases. NATO, however, has denied proposing any sovereignty deal and offered few details on the agreement, which I think is smart because, just keep giving Donald more rope with which to hang himself, metaphorically speaking. Despite Donald's walkback, there's deep confusion and mistrust among our European allies and Greenlandic officials, as it should be. There is literally no coming back, none, from what Donald did to America, to our reputation, to our standing in the world, and to the future of the Western Democratic Alliance. There is no coming back from that at all, and nor should they be. So I would urge our European allies and our other allies to stand firm and concede not an inch to this madness. Keep in mind, all of this occurred after global stock markets plunged in the wake of Donald's threats of a European trade war over Greenland. It's possible because, the only thing Donald cares about is money, and the only metrics that matter to him are the stock market and his polls. It's possible that a tanking stock market could rein him in, but I'm not holding my breath because that will require that he is still able to draw conclusions and make connections. And I'm not entirely certain that's the case anymore. Today, former special counsel Jack Smith testified publicly before the House Judiciary Committee. In his appearance, Smith reiterated that in 2023, he indicted Donald in 2 different cases because he had overwhelming evidence of crimes. Once again, Smith firmly asserted under oath that MAGA attacks on his investigations are completely unfounded. Here are some highlights from Smith's testimony.
As I testify before the committee today, I want to be clear. I stand by my decisions as special counsel, including the decision to bring charges against President Trump. Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in criminal activity. If asked whether to prosecute a former president based on the same facts today, I would do so regardless of whether that president was a Democrat or a Republican. No one should be above the law in this country, and the law required that he be held to account, so that is what I did. To have done otherwise on the facts of these cases would have been to shirk my duties as a prosecutor and as a public servant, of which I had no intention of doing.
Here's Smith recounting Donald's crimes in the case regarding his handling of top secret materials.
Rather than accept his defeat in the 2020 election, President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results and prevent the lawful transfer of power. After leaving office in January of 21, President Trump illegally kept classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago social club and repeatedly tried to obstruct justice to conceal his continued retention of those documents. Highly sensitive national security information was held in a ballroom and a bathroom.
Smith once again reminds us that his charges against Donald held up in court.
During my tenure as special counsel, we followed Justice Department policies, we observed legal requirements, and took actions based on the facts and the law. I made my decisions without regard to President Trump's political association, activities, beliefs, or candidacy in the 2024 election. President Trump was charged because the evidence established that he willfully broke the law, the very laws he took an oath to uphold. Grand juries in 2 separate districts reached this conclusion based on his actions, as alleged in the indictments they returned.
Again, Smith had 2 cases going against Donald. One having to do with his incitement of the insurrection on January 6, 2021, and the second having to do with his having stolen highly sensitive classified documents from the American people after he was no longer in office. We know Donald committed these crimes because we saw him do it. If it weren't for the fact they had personal pocket judge Aileen Cannon on his side, we would be in a very, very different place as Americans and as a country. Just another reminder that there is yet another thing that must be radically reformed in this country: the judiciary. I'm glad that Jack Smith got to say his piece, but sadly, these are two more very serious crimes against America Donald Trump will never be held to account for. Right now, seriously, it is more important than ever that we contact our congressional Republicans. We need to urge them to take action against the Trump regime's authoritarian agenda. Here's one way to do that. 5calls.org makes it quick and easy to pressure Congress. All you need to do is put in your zip code, and a website and app will tell you who to call, what to say, why it matters. In just a few minutes, you can call your members of Congress using simple scripts on the issues where public pressure can bring change. That again is 5calls.org. We particularly need to be putting pressure on Democrats and make them understand that we will not stand for more of the same. They need to recognize where we are, recognize what's at stake, and prove to us that they are willing to fight the right fight. For example, I don't want to hear that they're going to reform ICE. I want to hear that they're going to defund it entirely. I'd say abolish, but apparently some people are a little too delicate about that word. In other words, get rid of ICE. That's what I want to hear Democrats saying. So please go to 5calls.org, follow the instructions. It's really simple and it's very, very effective. Now, a few quick reminders. Please sign up for my Substack. It's called The Good in Us. Just visit marytrump.org to sign up for exclusive content. I post essays almost daily. I have interviews with incredible guests. We live stream Mary Trump Live there, but then later we post the video with a transcript in case you like reading your news instead of watching it. That again is marytrump.org. It doesn't cost anything, like YouTube. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe. However, there is a paid subscription that does more than I can tell you to help us do the work we need to do in this critically important election year. Also, thanks to those of you who have tuned into the Mary Trump podcast to hear my latest commentary on the Trump regime's daily depredations against America. Our podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts, and I mean everywhere. And then finally, for even more exclusive content, please sign up for my Patreon. That's at patreon.com/CW/MaryTrumpMedia225. Wow, that is quite a URL. Go there and you will unlock, if you subscribe, exclusive videos, prizes, writing, and much, much more. Finally, my favorite thing, the merchandise. Go to shop.marytrumpmedia.com for all of your merch needs. We have t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, tote bags, much, much more. Shop.marytrumpmedia.com. Wow, that's a lot of pitching. Oh yeah, and playing cards. Cool. Just all that pitching makes me need to breathe. So breathe. Whew. And that, of course, brings us to today's emotional support moment. First, before I get to wrapping up, I want us to unwind. It is about to be bitterly, bitterly, bitterly cold here in New York, and we might actually get a snowstorm. I'm very excited about this, but that's because I'm not going anywhere. So I understand if you're not excited about it. So we're going to flip the switch and watch a quiet summer sunset. So watch, listen, and breathe. Can we play that again, please? Actually, we can't because I've got to run. I am on with Erin Burnett tonight on CNN, so please check that out if you can. So, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get to your questions and comments, etc., tonight. But of course, I'd like to thank everybody who's watching on YouTube, everybody who's streaming on Twitter and over at The Good in Us, our Substack. Thank you to all of our new members, people gifting memberships, all of our super stickers, everybody giving us donations. We truly, truly appreciate it. And of course, thank you to our most excellent moderators for being most excellent at all times. Don't forget, the easiest way to support us is just subscribe to the channel. Also, like and share our videos. We get at least 2 dropping every single day, 7 days a week, in addition to our lives. Like them, share them, comment on them. It really does help us. Of course, to my amazing team, thank you guys. I know it's a lot, but we are staying on top of it, and we're all going to get through it. So again, thank you everybody so much. I will be back tomorrow night for Mary Trump Live at 6 p.m. Eastern. Again, check out Erin Burnett on CNN tonight. And in the meantime, everybody, please stay safe.